Probably the buzziest title in the horror world right now, if not cinema in general, minus Despicable Me 4 of course, is the latest title from writer-director Osgood Perkins, Longlegs, a serial killer horror thriller following FBI agent Lee Harker, portrayed by Micah Monroe, as she tries to track down the enigmatic and titular occult killer Longlegs, portrayed by an almost completely unrecognisable Nicolas Cage. If you've been following the movie's incredible marketing, which, let's be honest, who hasn't, some of those details may surprise you, as other than the most recent trailer, a lot of the build-up to this film has left everything about it, including what it's even really about, intentionally ambiguous, choosing to go the route of portraying a mood rather than any explanation of plot through these uncomfortable vignettes and teasers that closer mirror the iconography of true crime than they do any sort of cinematic experience. Everything from the posters that look like crime scene photos to the uncomfortable long zoom-ins on happy families in teasers titled things like "Every Year There Is Another" to the cryptic Zodiac-style alphabet that flashes in frames across all of these promos. Longlegs hasn't just been an upcoming movie, it's been a whole ass vibe. Following along with these cryptic clues that only allude to the film rather than talk directly about it has been a fun narrative experience all of its own, and it's certainly one that grabbed my attention, making the film one of my most anticipated of the year. However, it's also such a good marketing campaign that it has kind of been a bit of a double-edged sword in that it's set up ridiculously high expectations for the film, basically promising the most skin-crawling, intense and disturbing something. Hard to tell what, but it's going to be good, right? So the question is, does Longlegs deliver on this promise? And well, if you ask me, the answer is kind of yes, and also no. Longlegs is really good. It's great even. Though I'd be lying if I said I wasn't the tiniest bit disappointed after having seen it with some of the choices made in its narrative, as well as its overall creepiness factor. Though, to be fair to the film itself, I'm not sure how much of that is genuine disappointment with what was put in front of me versus the weight of the baggage that was my unfair expectations going into it. I wanted Longlegs to give me nightmares. I wanted it to get under my skin and leave me feeling shaken to my core. I wanted a grounded, gritty serial killer experience so expertly crafted, dread-filled and tense that I would come out of it with a similar coldness in my bones to when I went in totally blind to the ending of the Danish movie Speak No Evil, and I didn't get that. In fact, besides an incredibly executed opening couple of minutes, Longlegs didn't even scare me. And for a film that's being touted as one of the scariest films ever by multiple outlets and reviewers, that was a genuine letdown. However, that's not to say it didn't engross me, that it wasn't rife with excellent cinematic choices, that Nicolas Cage's performances, which some have found divisive and even described as hammy, wasn't for me one of the most captivating on-screen presences I've ever witnessed, or that the film didn't seem to have a rich and interesting potential subtext bubbling below a stylish presentation. There is a lot to love in Longlegs. Hell, it starts strong from the word go, the chilling opening scene marking one of my absolute favourites in recent memory. Without giving too many spoilers, we're introduced to an isolated house draped in a bright white snow, and a young girl notices a stranger, and that's all it takes to immediately set you on edge. Nothing has even happened yet, but everything about the way the scene is shot, composed, scored and framed communicates the same message. This stranger, this hidden, barely visible figure in the distance, means to harm. The whole thing opens in a 4:3 aspect ratio, creating an intense feeling of claustrophobia, and paired with the grainy old photograph-like quality of the image, there's just this overwhelming sensation that you're about to watch something very wrong unfold. Like you're experiencing the moments that lead up to the photographs you'd stumble across in a tacky Netflix documentary about some horrendous crime. And as the little girl at the window leaves the safety of her home to investigate the stranger's presence, there's a deep dread that practically begs you to cry out to her to stay inside, stay back, and stay as far away from that man as possible. This palpable tension all builds up to our first reveal of the stranger. First his voice and then his physical presence. A sudden introduction that breaks through the otherwise uncanny stillness. Everything about this opening is executed to perfection. it is tonally flawless and delivers exactly the same vibe that the marketing had promised. Unfortunately, I'd probably say this is the highest high of the whole film, and that while the rest of it features a similar level of skill and performance throughout, it never once, at least for me, got under my skin again the way this opening did. Having said that though, it's kind of hard to pin down what's holding it back for me. The atmosphere still permeates through every frame. There's not a single performance in the whole thing that doesn't shine, especially the aforementioned unrecognisable Cage, who with a short amount of the runtime absolutely leaps off the screen with the kind of over-the-top but genuinely creepy performance that only could come from his experimental style of delivery and giving it all sincerity. The makeup job on him is something that has been kept well hidden from audiences, with marketing materials even going so far as to black out his entire face when they couldn't avoid showing it otherwise. And if you have by any chance seen it in an out of context image, you'd be forgiven for thinking it looks a little excessive, perhaps even goofy, but paired with his unsettling high-pitched delivery and strange erratic movements, the whole thing works completely. In the hands of a lesser actor, it might have felt parody-like, the kind of thing you'd see in a Mike Myers movie, but with Cage at the helm, it's honestly magnetic. You can't take your eyes off him, and the way the film always partially hides his face through clever framing and lighting, or reveals it fully only in brief disturbing flashes, makes his presence feel even more unsettling. Like you're never really sure what it is exactly you're dealing with. That's not to undersell the presence of lead actress Micah Monroe though, who glides through the film with an overwhelming sense of discomfort through reserved body language and a quiet demeanour. An early encounter with a young girl asking her if it's scary being a lady FBI agent sees her framed at the other edge of the girl's bed, her body twisted away as she talks back to her in hesitant dialogue delivered over her own shoulder rather than face to face, as if the very nature of any social interaction whatsoever is physically painful for her and best avoided. She manages to inject a profound sense of unease in her character Lee that's infectious to the audience. There's this uncomfortable but confused essence that emanates from her. She strikes you as someone who carries a lot of weight, but what is that weight exactly? It's there, but it's foggy, distant, an anxiety that can't be placed. Conversations with her mother and her colleagues are functional but stilted, awkward, broken, like a facsimile of human interaction that exists under a black cloud of something. What that something is, you're never sure of. But as the plot opens and reveals more of itself, it's clear that this ambiguous strangeness to her manner is a very intentional and calculated motif that ties strongly into her character's journey as she attempts to connect the dots that tie her to the killer she is chasing. Pair these performances with an omnipresent gloomy vibe of a middle America gripped in the palpable tensions of the satanic panic, an atmosphere that's enhanced by the slow creeping tracking shots and unnatural stillness in the film's camera work, as well as the film's general preoccupation with having the audience gaze into an uncanny evil that consistently manifests itself in the form of an overwhelmingly horrendous intruding violence that crawls into and takes root in the homes of otherwise happy families, and needless to say, it's easy to see why the movie has been met with such acclaim. It regularly pulls off feats worth celebrating with a seemingly effortless and dreamlike manner that pulls you into this world. My problem then, I think, is almost entirely plot-based, though unfortunately it's hard to say exactly what my issues are here without getting into spoilers. So if you don't want those, turn off the video now, though if you don't mind them, stick around. So I think the elements of the movie that I'm not certain where I stand on the most is the inclusion of supernatural elements. It may be that I wasn't anticipating them, which to be fair is not the movie's or even the marketing's fault. After all, it was never said that the film wasn't a supernatural horror, but I did go in under the impression that while the killer was going to be involved in the occult, that based on the kind of true crime parallels the visuals of the movie are clearly tapping into, we'd get something a little more grounded in reality, and that the occult nature of the killer would merely be his own delusions as opposed to an actual satanic force. My illusions of this were however shattered within the first 5 minutes, when the plot just flat out tells us through exposition that our protagonist has some level of psychic powers that help her solve cases. Now before anyone gets at me for putting expectations on the film that I maybe shouldn't have and then examining it through that unfair lens, I want to be clear that I am not remotely opposed to the inclusion of supernatural elements within the narrative. In some ways, I even think they enhance the storytelling, particularly when it comes to the hollow victory of the film's final moments. My problem then is not with their inclusion, but their execution. In the first and second act of the movie, the film follows a central mystery. Longlegs, despite leaving a memento at the scene of all his crimes, seemingly never actually enters the homes of his victims. Instead, he seems to somehow have a way to get the fathers of these families to carry out his heinous acts upon their loved ones before killing themselves. It's an enigmatic setup, one that, due to how impossible it seems and how central its focus is to the main investigation, somewhat indirectly promises an ingenious payoff. The constant question of how does he do this? This doesn't make sense, is a sentiment echoed by the entire investigating cast, with hypotheses and theories being thrown out and scrapped between them as being too ridiculous. The truth then surely must be a compelling reveal, no? Well, because of the supernatural elements, the payoff is simply, it's just magic. It's just the devil at work doing some evil magic. And honestly, this could still work for me too if it felt like a reveal, but it doesn't. Not really. I do actually really love the idea that people are approaching things from a grounded perspective, not entertaining the notion that greater unknown forces are at play, only to have the rug swept from under them when they realise that actually the evil they have been pursuing is even more literally evil than they thought, and they are dealing with the devil himself. That's cool. That's interesting. That's compelling. Had it been an almost Dusk Till Dawn-esque switch of genre, where the film isn't supernatural at all until suddenly it is, I think that could have been really shocking and felt, well, evil. The problem is, though, that within the first 5 minutes of the movie, we are actively told that one of the characters just straight up has psychic powers, which kind of opens up the floodgates to the otherworldly a little too early in the movie for my liking. To the point that not only does evil black magic Satan killer no longer feel like a substantial reveal, it almost feels like a cop-out. How does the killer achieve this impossible thing? Magic. But why would these fathers ever do that to their families? Evil devil magic. Why would Longlegs do this? The evil magic compels him. I also think the way in which this evil magic manifests itself is, I don't know, needlessly contrived. Again, I don't think supernatural elements is a bad inclusion, but when the nature of it is this strange exposition heavy chain of events where the whole scheme is that Longlegs is a master doll maker who creates lifelike replicas of his targets that are then presented to them on their birthday by an accomplice dressed as a nun who pretends they have won said doll from a church competition in order to use these dolls as a Trojan horse present so that they can act as a vehicle to sneak inside the family homes a metal ball that sits in the dolls' heads, which is infused with the evil of the devil and allows Satan to exert his influence over the families causing their murders. It's a lot. It's kind of messy, and for me it undermines any reward to be found in the detective thriller elements of its narrative. I will say that it's not entirely without merit. All of these elements, while sounding out of nowhere in the way I describe them out of context here, are fairly foreshadowed, such as one of the metal balls being found in the investigation early on, and a character commenting that he swears it called out his ex-wife's name. I also think symbolically there's a lot going on here. Maybe this is me just overanalyzing things, but I got a real sense that the film kind of wanted to allude to issues of CSA. Longlegs himself to me feels deeply codified to be predatory in a whole different kind of way when you examine some of his behaviours. All of his targets are 9-year-old little girls. The way he speaks to them isn't with threatening anger, but rather, dare I say, like a groomer approaching with the manner of a friendly stranger, complimenting them and calling them little angels in the creepy way he does, and always making comments that draw attention to their infantile demeanour. One scene sees him approach a young girl at a store who calls on her father for help, stating, "The creepy man is back." And when you add in the dolls as a kind of symbol of trapping his victims in a perpetual childhood, preserving them forever in the moment they are 9 years old, there's something deeply unsettling, I think, in the subtext there. Lee, as well, who we later realise had her own run-in with Longlegs in her youth, obviously suffers from this kind of shut-off social awkwardness and restrictive body language. I actually don't think we ever even see her arms in the movie. Even when chilling in her own home, she exclusively wears long sleeves, and often often is depicted in turtlenecks, as if covering up every inch of her skin from observers, and a huge plot point for her is that she has issues with repressed memories, something that victims of CSA often suffer with. There's also lines from her mother like, "You grew up because I allowed you to grow up," that seem to take on deeper meaning when viewed through this lens. And the sole surviving victim of one of Longlegs' attacks being catatonic until he appears in her life again feels like it parallels some of the complicated relationships victims can often have with their abusers. If this was intentional, then I appreciate how the film seems to suggest such an act as being the ultimate evil, without actually having to depict any such thing in order to make this point. And if it's not intentional, I still think the fact that there's lots of interesting elements to digest and take apart and interpret in this different way is a testament to the richness of the film's character, performances and presentation. If nothing else, it's a movie that sticks with you. Initially, I hadn't quite connected with the ending of the film. Again, for the reason that it gets a little contrived and overstuffed for my tastes. But actually, in hindsight, I think if you view the final sequence as being some kind of cruel cosmic joke on Lee Harker's character pulled off by the devil himself as a kind of monkey paw-like retribution for a deal that was made with him earlier in the film, then it sort of in retrospect makes all the more out there elements work. Like all the strangeness, the dolls, the surviving victim, the mother's involvement, it was all just build up to a hellish, cruel joke targeted at Lee specifically. Just a sinister little plot to make the devil laugh. And what a chilling concluding point that is to go home with. It's a film that, in my opinion, works better the more you ruminate on it. Hell, even in the process of writing this video, I'm coming to the conclusion that I might have actually enjoyed the film more than I'd initially thought. And I thought I had a good time in the moment too. I'm still not 100% on board with some of the supernatural oddness and don't quite vibe entirely with the plot, but I can see the logic behind some of its more bizarre decisions. I do though just really wish more than anything that it had scared the shit out of me. Great film with some clunk along the way, but coming out of it with a damn good nightmare would have made it perfect for me. As it stands, it is fantastic. It's just a shame that we were promised flawless.